The locket felt as heavy as a tombstone in her palm, its polished silver, a cruel memory of a life that was now just smoke and dust. For 3 days, Eleanor Vance had tasted nothing but fear and grit, her stomach a hollow ache that mirrored the emptiness in her heart. Before her, the trading post owner, a man with eyes like a vulture, saw not a desperate woman, but a prize to be claimed. She held out the last remnant of her past, her voice a dry rasp. "Please, just for a little food." He was reaching for it, a greasy smile spreading across his face, when a shadow fell over them both. A voice, low and calm, as the deep earth cut through the stifling air. "Eat first," the warrior said. "We'll talk after." The sun over the Arizona Territory was a merciless, white-hot coin in a bleached blue sky. It beat down on the cracked earth, on the skeletal remains of long-dead cacti, and on the lone figure of Eleanor Vance as she staggered toward the faint shimmer of civilization on the horizon. Dust fine as powdered bone coated her traveling dress, turning the respectable navy blue into a uniform of grey despair. Her boots, once sturdy and fashionable, were scuffed and split, the leather crying out for water as much as her own parched throat. For what felt like an eternity, the sign for Higgins Mercantile and Trading Post had been her only guide, a crude promise of salvation in a land determined to bake her into the landscape. Now, standing before it, she felt a tremor of fear, not of the wilderness she was leaving, but of the men who inhabited its fringes. The building was a long, low structure of warped planks and dried mud, its single window clouded with grime, looking like a blind eye staring out at the unforgiving expanse. She pushed open the heavy door, the jingle of a small bell above it, sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. The air inside was thick with the smells of cured leather tobacco, stale whiskey, and something else, the faint, cloying scent of greed. Shelves overflowed with a chaotic assortment of goods, sacks of flour and beans, tins of peaches, bolts of calico, gleaming rifle barrels and jars of dubious-looking pickled goods. Behind the counter stood Bartholomew Bart Higgins. He was a man built for squeezing profits, with a portly belly that strained the buttons of his grimy waistcoat, and a face that seemed permanently set in a sneer. Small, shrewd eyes appraised her from head to toe, lingering on the lines of her face, the quality of her dress, despite its sorry state, and the desperation that she knew was etched into every feature. "Well now," he rasped his voice like gravel stirred with oil. "Look what the wind blew in. You lost, little lady." Eleanor gripped the small, hard object in her pocket. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had rehearsed this moment, but her throat was a desert. She swallowed the action, painful. "No, sir. I need provisions, some water, food." Higgins polished a glass with a dirty rag, his eyes never leaving her. "Provisions cost money. Coin, scrip. You got any?" The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. Her purse was empty, save for a few useless keepsakes from a life that no longer existed. Her husband Richard had always provided. He had also in his last fevered moments provided the terror that had sent her fleeing into this wasteland. "Run, Eleanor!" He had whispered, his face pale with sweat and fear. "Don't let Croft find you. Don't let him get the locket." "I have no coin," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. She hated the weakness in it, the tremor of a beggar. Higgins's sneer widened into a predatory smile. He leaned his corpulent frame against the counter. "That's a shame. A real shame. A pretty thing like you, out here all alone. The desert ain't kind to those without means." His gaze was an insult, a physical touch that made her skin crawl. "But perhaps we can arrange another form of payment." Eleanor's spine stiffened. She knew that look, that tone. She had seen it in the eyes of other men in other towns on her desperate flight west. She took a half step back, her hand flying protectively to the high collar of her dress. "I have something to trade," she said, her voice stronger, now laced with a cold fury. She pulled her hand from her pocket, uncurling her fingers to reveal the silver locket. It was an oval intricately engraved with swirling vines and a single delicate rose. It had been Richard's last gift to her, given on their first anniversary. It was the only beautiful thing she had left. Higgins's eyes narrowed the greed within them, sharpening to a fine point. He reached out a thick, sausage-like finger to touch it. "Well, well, sterling silver looks like. Let me see it." Eleanor hesitated. To let it go felt like a final betrayal, a severing of the last tie to the woman she had once been. But the gnawing emptiness in her stomach was a more immediate tyrant. With a trembling hand, she placed it on the rough-hewn wood of the counter. He snatched it up his thumb, rubbing avariciously over the smooth surface. He pried it open with a dirty nail. Inside, 2 miniature portraits stared back, a younger, happier Eleanor and Richard, handsome and proud in his lieutenant's uniform. "Humph, just pictures," he grumbled, disappointed. He weighed it in his palm. "It's light, not much silver here." "It's all I have," Eleanor pleaded. "Please, just a canteen of water and some dried bread. That's all I ask. For this—" He scoffed, a wheezing, unpleasant sound. "This might get you a cup of water. Maybe half a biscuit." He looked at her again, his eyes slithering over her. "But if you were to be accommodating, I could see my way to giving you a full meal. A real one, and maybe a room for the night." The vile implication hung in the dusty air, thick and suffocating. Revulsion and rage warred with the crippling weakness of her hunger. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, hot and shameful. She was about to snatch the locket back, to flee back into the sun, and take her chances with starvation, when a shadow filled the doorway. The jingle of the bell was softer this time, almost apologetic. A man stepped inside, moving with a silence that was startling. He was tall and lean with the fluid grace of a panther. His skin was the color of rich, sun-baked earth, and his long black hair was held back by a simple leather band. He wore buckskin trousers and a plain cotton shirt, and at his side hung a sheathed knife. But it was his eyes that held Eleanor captive. They were dark and penetrating, missing nothing, and in their depths there was a stillness, a profound calm, that seemed utterly alien to this place of grasping desperation. He was a native warrior, an Apache from the look of him, a man who belonged to the very wilderness that was trying to kill her. He took in the scene. In a single glance, Eleanor pale and trembling, Higgins leering over the counter, the silver locket gleaming between them. He said nothing, simply moving to a far corner of the store to examine a stack of blankets. Higgins shot him a venomous glare. "We don't serve your kind in here unless you got cash, US dollars." The warrior ignored him, his focus seemingly on the wool. Higgins turned his attention back to Eleanor, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, greasy whisper. "Don't mind him. Now, about our little arrangement." He reached for her hand. It was too much. The hunger, the fear, the degradation. A sob caught in Eleanor's throat. She stared at the locket, her last link to a life of love and safety, about to be traded for a moment of squalid survival at the hands of this foul creature. Before Higgins's fingers could touch her, the warrior was there. He hadn't seemed to move, but he now stood beside her, a silent, imposing presence. He looked down at the locket, then at Eleanor's tear-streaked face, then at the trader. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. He placed a few coins on the counter. They weren't US dollars. They were old Spanish silver, worn smooth with time. "For bread, cheese, and a full canteen of water," he said. His voice was low and resonant, with a cadence that spoke of wide-open spaces and ancient traditions. It was the first time he had spoken, and the sound of it commanded the room. Higgins stared at the coins, then at the warrior. "I'm in the middle of a transaction here." The warrior's gaze did not waver. It was not threatening, yet it carried an undeniable weight, an authority that had nothing to do with laws written on paper. He gently pushed the locket back across the counter, toward Eleanor's hand. Then he looked at her, and for the first time his eyes softened just a fraction. A flicker of something that looked like understanding or perhaps pity. "Eat first," he said the words, a simple, profound statement. "We'll talk after." The command was so unexpected, so contrary to the brutal calculus of survival. She had learned that Eleanor could only stare. But Higgins, however, understood the shift in power. He saw the Spanish silver on his counter, weighed it against the unyielding presence of the warrior, and made a swift, pragmatic decision. The potential for a sordid conquest of a desperate woman wasn't worth a confrontation with this man. With a grumble, Higgins swept the coins into his palm. He slapped a wedge of dry cheese and a small loaf of hard bread onto the counter, and moved to fill a canteen from a barrel in the corner. He worked with a sullen, resentful energy, pointedly ignoring both of them. Eleanor's fingers closed around the cool silver of her locket, the relief so overwhelming it almost buckled her knees. She slid it back into the hidden pocket of her dress, the familiar weight, a small anchor in the churning sea of her emotions. She looked at her benefactor, the Apache man, whose name she did not know, and her mind struggled to form the words of gratitude. "Thank you," she managed, her voice still hoarse. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and picked up the food and the now full canteen. He gestured with his head toward the door. "Outside. The air here is foul." She followed him without question, stepping back out into the blinding glare of the afternoon sun. He led her around the side of the trading post to a sliver of shade offered by the building's overhang. A single weathered bench sat against the wall. He set the provisions down and stood back, giving her space. Eleanor sank onto the bench, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the confrontation and the savage onset of hunger, now that food was within reach. She uncorked the canteen and drank the lukewarm, slightly metallic water, the most exquisite thing she had ever tasted. She let it soothe the raw fire in her throat before she dared to eat. She broke off a piece of the bread which was stale but substantial, and a sliver of the sharp, salty cheese. The simple act of chewing and swallowing was a miracle. The warrior stood nearby, his back to her, looking out over the shimmering plains. He was not watching her eat a courtesy, for which she was profoundly grateful. To be so hungry was to be reduced to an animal, and he was affording her the dignity to satisfy that primal need without scrutiny. He was patient, his stillness, a stark contrast to the frantic, grasping energy of the world she had been navigating. When she had eaten her fill, a careful, measured amount, her shrunken stomach unable to handle more, she corked the canteen and set the remaining food beside her. Her strength was slowly returning, and with it, the full weight of her situation. She had been saved, but she was still lost, still hunted, and she now owed a debt to a complete stranger, a man her society had taught her to fear. I don't know how I can repay you," she said to his back. He turned slowly, his dark eyes resting on her. "The coins are nothing." He walked over and sat on the far end of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. "My name is Coda. Eleanor Vance." She offered her name as if it were a fragile gift. "You are far from the lands of people named Eleanor Vance," he observed. It was not a question, but a simple statement of fact. "Yes." She looked down at her hands, twisting a loose thread on her dress. "I am traveling to California. To meet family." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, but the truth was too dangerous to share. Coda was silent for a long moment, studying her. He was not like the other men she had met. He did not seem to be trying to appraise her value or suss out her weaknesses for exploitation. He was simply observing with an unnerving intensity. "That locket," he said finally, his voice soft but direct. "It is important to you." Eleanor's hand instinctively went to her pocket, her fingers closing around the metal oval. "It was a gift from my husband. He is in California." The question was gentle, but it pierced through her fragile composure. "He is dead." She said the words stark and cold. The raw grief, which had been buried under layers of fear and exhaustion, resurfaced with a vengeance. She fought back the tears, refusing to break down in front of this stranger. Coda's expression did not change, but a flicker of something empathy perhaps warmed his eyes. "My wife is also gone," he said quietly. "The spotted sickness took her and our son 2 winters ago. A part of the spirit dies with them." The simple, unadorned confession of his own loss was more comforting than any platitude could have been. It forged a tiny, unexpected bridge between their 2 vastly different worlds. He was not just a warrior, not just a savage as men like Higgins would call him. He was a man who had known love and grief. "I am sorry for your loss," she whispered, and she meant it. They sat in silence again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was shared, comfortable. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. The oppressive heat of the day began to recede, replaced by a cooling breeze that rustled the dry grasses. "A man like Higgins doesn't forget an insult," Coda said, breaking the quiet. "He saw you as his. He believes I stole his prize. He will not let that go." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. What will he do? He has friends, men who are paid to be angry for him. They will come. Coda's gaze swept the horizon, not with alarm, but with a practiced, assessing calm. "We should not be here when they do." The "we" startled her. She had assumed he would go his own way, that his act of kindness was a fleeting moment of charity. The thought of traveling with him was both terrifying and, to her surprise, reassuring. Alone, she was prey. With him, she might stand a chance. But why would he help her? "Why are you doing this?" She asked the question she had been holding back. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Coda turned his gaze from the horizon to the locket hidden in her pocket. He didn't look at her face, but at the spot on her dress where the silver lay concealed. "The man who made that locket." He began, his voice taking on a new, somber tone. "The man who carved the rose and the vines. I knew him. He was my friend. His name was Matteo, a silversmith from Santa Fe. He had a unique way of twisting the silver on the stems, like a braid of sweetgrass." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She slowly pulled the locket from her pocket, her fingers tracing the engraved pattern on the front. She had always admired the craftsmanship, but had never given it this kind of scrutiny. Now, in the fading light, she could see it clearly, the tiny, intricate braids in the silver stems of the vines. How did you know him?" She breathed, her mind reeling. The world, which had already been thrown off its axis, suddenly felt as if it were spinning out of control. "He was an honest man," Coda said, his voice laced with old sorrow. He made beautiful things, and he made the mistake of witnessing a crime. A wealthy man, a man with powerful friends in the army, wanted a piece of land that did not belong to him. Matteo saw the papers being forged. He saw the real owner threatened and driven off. He was going to speak to the magistrate. Coda paused, his jaw tightening. He was found dead a week later. They called it a robbery. Eleanor stared at him, the half-eaten loaf of bread forgotten in her lap. Her husband's name was Richard. The name of the man who had terrified him, the name he had uttered with his dying breath, was Croft. Sterling Croft, a wealthy man with powerful friends. The man who did this, she said, her voice trembling. The man who wanted the land. Do you know his name? Coda looked directly into her eyes, and in their dark depths she saw a reflection of her own fear, her own desperate search for answers. His name is Sterling Croft, he said. And I believe the locket your husband gave you is more than just a memory. I believe it is the reason he is dead, and it is the reason you are being hunted. The name fell between them, like a stone sending ripples of ice through Eleanor's veins. Sterling Croft, the name that had been a phantom in her life for months, a source of whispered arguments between her and Richard, the shadow that had ultimately consumed him. To hear it spoken aloud by this stranger in this desolate place was a jarring confirmation of her deepest fears. The danger she was fleeing was not random. It had a name and it had a history soaked in blood. You knew him. She stated the words coming out as a breathless accusation. You knew my husband. Coda shook his head slowly. No, I did not know Lieutenant Richard Vance. I only knew the man whose work he purchased. Matteo spoke of an army officer who commissioned this locket. A young man deeply in love with his wife, who paid well and spoke of honor. His gaze was steady, searching. But a man can change. Fear can make a good man do bad things. Eleanor recoiled as if struck. Richard was a good man. The defense was automatic, a reflex honed by years of love and loyalty. But even as she said it, the doubts that had plagued her for months resurfaced. The late nights Richard had spent poring over ledgers, his face pale and drawn. The sudden influx of money they couldn't possibly afford. His growing paranoia, the way he would start at every unexpected knock on the door. He was, she repeated more to convince herself than Coda. He was honorable, but he was trapped. He worked for Croft, an associate in his land speculation company. He thought it was a legitimate enterprise. She looked down at the locket in her hand, the faces of her and Richard, staring up at her from another lifetime. He found out the truth. He discovered that Croft was forging deeds, using army patrols to intimidate settlers, stealing land from people who had no power to fight back. From your friend Matteo's people. From everyone. Coda listened, his expression impassive, but his eyes held a keen, focused intelligence. He was absorbing every word, fitting the pieces together. Richard wanted to go to the authorities. Eleanor continued, her voice cracking. He gathered evidence, documents, copies of the forged deeds, a sworn statement from another man who was involved. He was terrified, but he was going to do it. He told me he couldn't live with the guilt. She paused, the memory of that last night, vivid and excruciating. The storm raging outside, Richard's feverish intensity as he packed a satchel. The night before he was to leave for the territorial capital, he fell ill. A sudden, violent fever. The army doctor called it stomach colic. But it was too fast, too convenient. He died before dawn. As he lay dying, delirious and weak, he had pushed the locket into her hand. "It's all in here, Eleanor," he had gasped. "The proof. Don't let him get it. Run." Promise me you'll run." "I thought he was delirious," she confessed to Coda, tears now streaming freely down her face. "I thought he meant the locket itself, the memory of our love. I didn't understand. I just ran. I packed what I could, and I fled. I've been running ever since, living on what little money I had, selling my belongings one by one, until this was all that was left." Coda reached out not to touch her, but to point a long, steady finger at the locket. "May I?" Numbly she handed it to him. He didn't look at the portraits. He turned it over and over in his calloused hands, his eyes examining the intricate silverwork with an expert's precision. His thumb pressed against the delicate hinge, then traced the outer rim. He stopped at the very bottom, where the swirling vines converged. "Matteo was a clever man," Coda murmured. "He loved puzzles. He believed that beauty should also be functional." His thumbnail found a tiny, almost invisible seam in the engraved pattern. He pressed down firmly, then slid his nail to the side. With a soft click, a false bottom on the back of the locket sprang open. Eleanor gasped. She had held this locket every day for 2 years. She had polished it, opened it to look at the pictures, clutched it for comfort. She had never known. Inside the tiny hidden compartment, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not a document, but a small, intricately folded piece of brass, no bigger than her thumbnail. It was a key. A watch key, by the look of it, but of a unique and complex design. Attached to it by a fine thread was a minuscule, tightly rolled scrap of paper. Coda carefully worked the paper free and unrolled it with a surgeon's delicacy. He held it out for her to see. Scrawled in Richard's familiar hand was a short sequence: St. Jude's, Phoenix, Box 73. St. Jude's, the church in Phoenix where they had been married, a place of sacred memory. Box 73, a safe deposit box. The key. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Richard hadn't been delirious, he had been precise. He had hidden the key to the evidence in the one place he knew Croft would never think to look, and trusted her to keep it safe. "This is the proof," Eleanor whispered in awe and terror. "The documents. They're in a bank box in Phoenix." "And Croft knows your husband had it," Coda added, his voice grim. "But he does not know where. He only knows that you fled with the locket. That is why you are being hunted. He is not just trying to silence you. He is trying to recover the evidence that can destroy him." Suddenly the weight of the tiny key felt immense. It was no longer just a piece of metal. It was the sum of Richard's courage, the cause of his death, and her only hope for justice. It was also a death sentence, if it fell into the wrong hands. She looked at Coda, this man sent by a fate she couldn't comprehend. His path had crossed hers because of a shared enemy and a piece of silver. He had no reason to take on her fight, to risk his life for her. "You should go," she told him, her voice firm, despite the fear coiling in her gut. "Take your coins back from Higgins. This isn't your battle. Croft is a powerful man. He will kill anyone who gets in his way. He's already killed your friend. And my husband." Coda carefully refolded the piece of paper and tucked it back beside the key. He snapped the secret compartment shut, the click echoing in the twilight. He handed the locket back to her. "Matteo was my wife's brother," he said softly, and the revelation struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. "I made a promise to his spirit that I wouldn't rest until the man who murdered him paid for his crime. I have been tracking Croft's operations for over a year, gathering whispers, searching for a weakness. I had nothing. Until now." He stood up, his tall frame silhouetted against the deepening violet of the sky. "Your battle, Eleanor Vance, has been my battle all along. I just did not know it. He looked toward the darkening horizon, his eyes narrowed. And Higgins's friends are coming. I can feel their thirst in the dust. The feeling Coda spoke of was not a metaphor. It was a tangible presence, a disturbance in the placid rhythm of the desert evening. He tilted his head, listening to something beyond Eleanor's range of hearing a faint vibration in the earth, a wrongness on the wind. "Get your things," he said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent pitch. "Only what you can carry. We leave now." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through Eleanor. There was nowhere to go but back into the vast, hostile wilderness. "But where we can't travel in the dark. It is better to be blind in the dark than to be seen in the light." Coda countered, already moving. He retrieved a small, tightly bound pack from behind the bench, something she hadn't even noticed before, and slung it over his shoulder. He took the remaining bread and cheese, wrapping them in a piece of cloth and stowing them away. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the canteen Coda had bought for her. The locket, now a source of both hope and immense peril, was safely tucked away again. Coda took her arm, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled her away from the trading post, not toward the open road, but toward the jagged line of mesas and rocky outcrops that rose from the desert floor a half-mile away. The land there was broken and treacherous, a maze of canyons and shadows. "Stay low and move quietly," he instructed. "Do not speak unless I speak to you." The journey was a nightmare. The ground was uneven, littered with sharp rocks and thorny bushes that tore at her dress and scratched her ankles. The darkness was almost absolute, broken only by a sliver of moon that offered more shadows than light. Coda moved through it with an eerie, silent confidence, his feet seeming to know the location of every stone and ravine. He was a ghost in the landscape, while Eleanor felt like a clumsy, crashing intruder, her ragged breaths and stumbling footsteps sounding like thunder in the immense quiet. She had no idea how long they walked, time stretching and compressing in the disorienting darkness. It felt like hours. Finally, Coda pulled her into a deep crevice between two towering rock formations, pressing her back against the cold stone. He put a finger to his lips, his eyes fixed on the direction from which they had come. Eleanor held her breath, straining her ears. And then she heard it. The rhythmic thudding of horses' hooves, growing steadily louder. A few moments later, 3 riders appeared, dark silhouettes against the starlit horizon. They rode straight for Higgins' mercantile. Higgins's friends, Coda breathed into her ear, his voice so quiet it was more a vibration than a sound. "They ride for Sterling Croft." They watched as the riders dismounted at the trading post. A square of light appeared as the door opened, and the muffled sound of angry voices carried on the night air. The men didn't stay long. Soon they remounted one of them, carrying a lantern. They began to circle the area, the swinging beam of light cutting swaths through the darkness, searching. "He told them which way we went," Eleanor whispered, her throat tight with terror. "He told them what he thinks he knows," Coda corrected. "He would assume we took the main trail. He is not a man who understands the ways of the rock and the shadow." The lantern beam swept closer, painting the face of the rocks across from their hiding place in a ghostly yellow light. Eleanor shrank back, pressing herself harder against the stone, convinced they would be seen. The light washed over the opening of their crevice and then moved on. The riders conferred their voices, still an indistinct rumble, before galloping off to the east, following the main trail away from the mountains. Eleanor let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding her body trembling uncontrollably. "They will be back when they find no tracks," Coda said calmly. "We must keep moving." He led her deeper into the labyrinth of rock, climbing higher, the path growing steeper and more precarious. He moved with tireless energy, often pausing to give her a hand, his strong grip pulling her up over ledges she never could have managed on her own. He was teaching her as they went in short, clipped phrases. Step on the flat of the rock, not the gravel. Listen to the slide of the pebbles, they tell you where the path is weak. Breathe from your belly, not your chest. Sometime after midnight, he finally called a halt. He found a shallow cave, little more than an overhang, but it was sheltered from the wind and completely hidden from below. "We rest here until first light," he announced. Eleanor collapsed onto the sandy floor of the cave, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. She was exhausted, scratched and bruised, but she was alive. She was safe for now. Coda sat near the mouth of the cave, a sentinel watching over their back trail. "How did you learn all this?" she asked, her voice raspy with fatigue. "To move like that? To read the land?" He was silent for a long time, and she thought he wouldn't answer. "My people have always lived here," he said, finally, his gaze distant. "The rock teaches you patience. The sun teaches you respect. The thirst teaches you wisdom. The white men come and build their straight roads and their square houses. They try to force the land to bend to their will. But the land doesn't bend. It waits. It endures." He looked at her, his eyes dark and serious in the faint moonlight. "Croft is like that. He thinks he can force the world to his will. He builds his empire on stolen ground with stolen lives. But he is a square house in a land of wind and rock. And a reckoning will come." His words resonated with a power that went beyond mere vengeance. It was the certainty of a natural law, a belief that justice was as inevitable as the rising of the sun. For the first time since Richard's death, Eleanor felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling, but she recognized it. It was hope. She drifted into an uneasy sleep, her last conscious thought not of the men hunting her, but of her strange protector. He was a man born of this harsh, beautiful land, a man who had lost everything just as she had. Yet he was not broken. He was like the rock around them, weathered and scarred but enduring, and for some reason he had chosen to shelter her in his shadow. The dust devil of Croft's making was swirling around them, but in this small cave with this silent warrior, Eleanor felt a sliver of impossible peace. They moved at first light. Coda woke her not with a word, but with a light touch on her shoulder. The dawn was a pale grey line in the east, and the air was crisp and cold. He handed her a strip of dried meat venison, he explained, which was tough and chewy, but sent a welcome warmth through her system. "We cannot stay in one place for long," he said. "They will send trackers. We must leave a confusing trail, then none at all." The day was a lesson in a world Eleanor had never known existed. Coda showed her how to walk on rock, to leave no footprints, how to use the wind to carry their scent away from any pursuers, how to find water, a slow, patient seep from a fissure in a rock wall, which they collected in their canteen, drop by precious drop. He was a patient teacher, his instructions concise and practical. He seemed to be remaking her, stripping away the helpless woman she had been, and forging a survivor. She learned to read the subtle signs of the desert. The way a lizard scurried for cover meant something larger was near. The flight pattern of a hawk could reveal the location of a hidden spring. She learned the names of the plants, the ones that could be eaten, the ones that could be used for medicine, and the ones that were poison. It was a language she had never imagined, and Coda was its fluent translator. During a rest in the heat of the afternoon, huddled in the shade of a gnarled juniper tree, she finally felt safe enough to ask the questions that burned in her mind. "Tell me about Matteo," she said softly. Coda's gaze drifted to the distant horizon. He was not a warrior. He was a maker. He saw beauty in things others discarded. He could take a worthless lump of rock, a piece of raw turquoise, and see the sky within it. He could take silver, a metal of greed for men like Higgins and Croft, and shape it into a rose. He unconsciously touched his own chest. He made a small silver bird for my wife once. She never took it off. His voice was heavy with memory. When she died, I buried it with her. Matteo said it was so her spirit could fly free. He fell silent, the loss still a palpable presence around him. Croft took more than just land from him. Coda continued, his voice hardening. He took his faith in the world. Matteo believed in fairness. He believed that the law of the white man, while strange, was built on a foundation of justice. When he saw Croft's crimes, he believed the law would protect the innocent. He went to the local deputy, a man named Henderson. He told him everything. "What happened?" Eleanor asked, leaning forward. The next day, Deputy Henderson rode out to Croft's ranch. They spoke for a long time. When Henderson rode back to town, he had a new horse and a heavy saddlebag. He told everyone Matteo had been lying, trying to stir up trouble between the settlers and the natives. 2 days later, Matteo was dead. The story was suffocating in its bleakness. It was a tale of absolute corruption, where power and money twisted everything, leaving no room for honor or justice. "So we can't go to the law," Eleanor said, the hope she had felt the night before. Dimming. "They're all in his pocket." "Not all," Coda corrected. "Men like Henderson are small and weak. They can be bought. But Croft's power comes from his connections back east and from the fear he spreads here. The evidence your husband collected, it does not accuse a small-town deputy. It accuses Croft himself, with names, dates, and locations. Proof like that in the right hands cannot be so easily buried. But whose hands are the right ones? There is a U.S. Marshal in Phoenix, Frank Corrigan. He is an old man near retirement. They say he is stubborn and cannot be bought. He has gone up against powerful men before. He is our only chance." Phoenix. The name resonated with her. St. Jude's Church, the bank, Box 73. Their destination was the same. It felt like the strands of her chaotic flight were finally weaving together into a single terrifying tapestry. "It's a long way to Phoenix," she said, thinking of the vast, dry miles that lay between them and the city. "The desert is a hard path," Coda agreed, "but it is also a safe one. Croft's men know the roads and the towns. They do not know the canyons. They do not know the whispers on the wind." That evening, as they made a small, smokeless fire in another hidden alcove, Eleanor felt a shift inside herself. The constant gnawing fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was no longer her master. She was learning to live with it, to function alongside it. She watched Coda as he expertly skinned a rabbit he had caught in a simple snare, his movements economical and precise. There was no cruelty in the act, only a deep-seated respect for the life that would now sustain theirs. She finally felt ready to tell him the whole truth, to unburden herself of the secrets that had festered within her. She told him about Richard's last few weeks, not just his fear, but his shame. He took Croft's money. She admitted the words, tasting bitter. In the beginning, he used it to buy me things. This dress, the locket. He said his investments were paying off. I didn't question it. I was happy and proud. Her voice trembled with self-recrimination. I should have known. I should have seen the lie. "You saw the man you loved," Coda said, not looking up from his work. "Love can be a sun that blinds us to the shadows at our feet. The money was a trap, she continued. Once Richard had accepted it, Croft owned him. He implicated him in the schemes, made him a part of the forgeries. Richard kept a separate ledger, a secret one, detailing everything. The money paid out the true deeds, the threats made. That's what is in the box. His confession and his accusation. She finally understood the true weight of Richard's last act. It was not just an attempt to save her. It was an attempt to redeem himself. The box in Phoenix held not only the downfall of Sterling Croft, but the last shred of her husband's honor, and he had entrusted it to her. "I have to get to that box," she said, a new resolve hardening her voice. "It's not just for my safety anymore. It's for him, and for Matteo." Coda looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers across the flickering firelight. He saw the transformation in her, the fear being burned away, replaced by a core of steel she never knew she possessed. He gave a slow, respectful nod. "Then we will get to Phoenix," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "We will walk the hidden paths and listen to the whispers on the wind. And we will carry the truth with us." That night, for the first time in months, Eleanor slept without dreaming of running. She dreamt instead of a silver bird flying free against a turquoise sky. The 5-day journey to Phoenix was a crucible that burned away the last of Eleanor's former self. They traveled under the cool blanket of night and rested in the shade during the sun's tyrannical reign. Coda guided them through a shifting world of rock and saguaro, teaching her the silent language of the land. She grew tougher, her skin browned by the sun, her spirit hardened by the miles. The woman who had collapsed at Higgins Mercantile was a ghost, a memory from another life. They approached the city from the south, avoiding main roads for a network of dusty alleyways. The cacophony of Phoenix clattering wagons, shouting vendors, and tinny saloon music was a jarring shock after the desert's profound silence. Coda, a master of his own environment, was now a tense outsider, his heritage drawing hostile stares from the townsfolk. He pulled the brim of a worn hat low, but he couldn't hide the watchful grace that set him apart. "The marshal's office is on the main street, across from the Grand Hotel," he said in a low voice. "Too open, too many eyes." "And the bank is next to it," Eleanor added, her heart starting to pound. "The Phoenix Mutual Trust." They secured a small, stuffy room in a boarding house on the edge of town, paying with the last of Coda's Spanish silver. It was a meager sanctuary, but it was theirs. "I'll go to the bank first." Eleanor stated, her voice imbued with a newfound authority. "I'll retrieve the box. You go to the marshal's office and ask for Corrigan. Tell him you have information about Sterling Croft, but don't mention the documents yet. Just see if he's the man they say he is. We meet back here in 1 hour." Coda's instinct was to protect her. "It is too dangerous for you alone." "I am less conspicuous," she countered, and they both knew it was true. A well-dressed white woman would be ignored at a bank, while Coda would be scrutinized. "It is the only way." He gave a reluctant nod, and they left separately. Eleanor walked toward the center of town, her posture straight, her gait purposeful. She forced an air of confidence she did not feel as she entered the Phoenix Mutual Trust, an imposing brick symbol of order. Inside, she approached the brass grill. "I am here to access my safe deposit box," she told the prim clerk, her voice betraying none of the tremor in her hands. "The name is Vance, box 73. She presented the complex key. The clerk checked his ledger, his eyes flicking from the book to her face. For a heart-stopping moment, she feared an alert had been placed, that Croft's reach extended even here. But the clerk simply nodded, and taking a second key, led her into the cold, silent vault. He unlocked the small metal door marked 73, slid out a heavy tin box, and placed it on a table in a private viewing room before tactfully withdrawing. With trembling fingers, Eleanor lifted the lid. Inside lay a thick, oilskin-wrapped package. She untied the string. There it was, Richard's secret ledger, filled with his precise, damning script. Bundled with it were copies of fraudulent deeds and a sworn signed affidavit from another man Croft had ruined, confirming everything. It was all there. Richard's final desperate act of courage had not been in vain. Securing the package inside her dress, she walked out of the bank, the weight of the evidence a heavy, righteous burden. Meanwhile, Coda stepped into the marshal's office. The room was Spartan, smelling of sawdust and gun oil. Behind a large oak desk sat an older man with a shock of white hair and a face etched with the lines of hard-won experience. His eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, appraised Coda without prejudice. This had to be Frank Corrigan. "What can I do for you?" Corrigan asked, his voice a low rumble. "My name is Coda," he began. "I have information regarding the activities of a man named Sterling Croft." Corrigan's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. "A lot of people have information about Mr. Croft, mostly gossip and smoke. What makes yours different? It concerns stolen land and murder." Before Corrigan could reply, the door flew open. Two rough, hard-faced men with Colts on their hips filled the doorway, their eyes locking on to Coda with predatory glee. The lead man, marked by a scar that split his eyebrow, grinned. "Well, look what we have here, Marshal," he sneered. "We were just tracking this Indian. He's wanted for robbery and assault on a fine citizen back at Higgins Post." Corrigan glanced from the hired guns to Coda, his hand resting lightly on the butt of the pistol on his desk. "Is that a fact? I don't see a warrant." "Don't need one," the second man snarled. "We're making a citizen's arrest." It was a flimsy pretext, and everyone in the room knew it. They were here to kill Coda. "This is my office, gentlemen," Corrigan said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "And in my office I decide who gets arrested. I suggest you both walk out." The scarred man laughed. "I don't think so, old man." His hand dropped toward his gun. He was fast, but Coda was faster. In a single explosive motion, Coda kicked a small desk into the second gunman's legs, sending him sprawling. Simultaneously, Coda's long knife was in his hand, not for a thrust, but for a throw. It spun through the air, a silver blur of purpose, and embedded itself in the scarred man's gun hand with a sickening thud. The man screamed, his pistol clattering uselessly to the floor. Marshal Corrigan's own gun was now drawn, the barrel leveled at the second man struggling on the floor. "Stay down, son, or your partner won't be the only one bleeding." At that exact moment, Eleanor, drawn by the commotion, burst into the office. She took in the scene in a second, the wounded gunman, the other frozen under the marshal's gaze, and Coda, standing calm and ready. "Marshal Corrigan," she cried, pulling the oilskin package from her dress. "My name is Eleanor Vance. This is why they're here. This is the proof of Sterling Croft's crimes. It's all in here." The scarred man's eyes widened in panic. He saw the documents, the marshal, and knew the game was lost. With a guttural roar, he lunged, not for Coda, but for Eleanor, his good hand grasping for the evidence that would destroy his boss. Coda moved to intercept, but Corrigan was faster. The office exploded with the deafening report of a single gunshot. The scarred man jerked to a halt, a look of stunned surprise on his face, before collapsing in a heap. A ringing silence descended. Corrigan slowly rose from behind his desk, smoke curling from his revolver. He looked at Eleanor, at Coda, and at the damning package in her hands. "Ma'am," he said, his voice weary but firm, "I think you and I have a lot to talk about." The aftermath was a whirlwind of swift justice. Marshal Corrigan, true to his reputation, dismantled Sterling Croft's corrupt empire with methodical precision. Armed with Richard's ledger, Croft and his accomplices were arrested, their power evaporating under the stark light of truth. Eleanor's testimony was recorded, her husband's name cleared, and his legitimate assets restored to her. The terror that had defined her life was finally over. 2 days later, she stood with Coda as he prepared to leave Phoenix. The city with its noise and laws was not his world. He was returning to the mountains, to the quiet lands that held his past and his peace. "What will you do now, Eleanor Vance?" he asked, his gaze steady. "You are free. You can go anywhere." She looked at the stagecoach office, at the promise of a return to the civilized life she once knew, and felt nothing. That woman was a stranger to her now. The desert had burned away her weakness and forged something new. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confessed quietly, "or where I belong." Coda nodded, a deep understanding in his eyes. "You are the woman who walked the stone paths and learned to listen to the wind. Your path is your own now." At the edge of town, he mounted his horse. There were no formal goodbyes. Their bond went deeper than words. "If you ever seek the whispers on the wind," he said, "they are loudest in the high country." Then he turned and rode toward the distant purple mountains, never looking back. Eleanor watched until he was a speck on the horizon. She was alone, her future, an unwritten map as vast as the desert before her. But for the first time, she was not afraid. She turned her face to the sun and took her first step into a new life. The story of Eleanor Vance is a testament to the fire that can be forged in the harshest of crucibles. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures we possess are not the trinkets we cling to from our past, but the hidden reserves of strength we find within ourselves when all else is lost. Her journey with Coda was more than a flight from danger. It was a pilgrimage toward a new identity, proving that even in the most lawless of lands, justice can be found, and even the most broken of spirits can find a new horizon to walk towards. If this story of survival courage and unlikely alliances in the unforgiving West resonated with you, please help us share it with others. Hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with a friend who loves a powerful story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales from the annals of history that feel as real and immediate as life itself. Thank you for listening.